Before I start, I would just like to acknowledge that I live and work in Ottawa, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. But my field site is located in Yukon, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Trondoquichin and Vuntutquichin peoples. And as settlers, it is our responsibility to take the steps towards making truth and reconciliation realities in our communities, particularly with National Indigenous Day of Truth and Reconciliation coming up. I believe it's on Saturday, September 30th. I think it's a really important time to educate ourselves as settlers and see what we can do to honor the treaty rights of all Indigenous people. With that, I will begin my talk about horse evolution. Oh no, is it going to work? Okay, it is going to work, yay. So horses are kind of this ideal model organism, if you will, for evolutionary processes. And often what we're shown in textbooks or throughout middle school is this very linear transition, starting from a very small animal, going to a very large animal that we know as the modern horse of the genus Equus. However, this is a little bit oversimplified. In reality, horse evolution looks much more like this. Instead of just one, straight line, linear route, it's more like a bush, a very branching system of evolution with lots of different lineages, all of which, except for Equus, have died out today. So how exactly we got from this very small ancestor to the modern horses is what we're going to dive into today. And then at the end, we're going to talk just a little bit about the research that I myself in particular do. So of course, we're going to start with Eohippus, which is the dawn horse. This is considered to be the earliest ancestor to the horses as we know them today, and is the oldest member in the family Equidae. It appeared about 52 million years ago, give or take, in the early Eocene, and most fossils are found from the Wind River Basin in Wyoming. Eohippus went extinct about 34 million years ago, but has given rise to horses as we know them today and all the other horse adjacent species that we're going to chat about. So what are some traits that Eohippus exhibited? Well, to start, unlike modern horses, they had multiple toes. You see here that they had 4 toes on the front limb and 3 toes on the hind limb. And each toe is equipped with this small sort of proto-hoof feature, but the bottoms of their feet were padded. So think something like a dog or a cat. Only the 5th toe on the front limb, so that's the toe just over here, this most leftmost one, did not come into contact with the ground, but the rest of the toes on both the front and then all the toes on the hind limb were weight-bearing. Eohippus also had what we call brachydont teeth, or low-crowned, meaning that this portion of the tooth is relatively small in relation to the root. And this is thought to be an adaptation to a more browsing diet. So softer foods, think leaves and fruits are probably what Eohippus would have been feeding on. And as I alluded to before, Eohippus had a relatively small body size. So we can see it was about maybe a foot tall, slightly larger than that. And this is especially small when we consider, how large modern horses are today and how large some of the horses that we're going to chat about as well are in comparison to it. However, it still had relatively long limbs compared to its body size, which is a good adaptation for running. However, all of the lower limb bones, like we see over here, are unfused. So this makes it a little bit more challenging for them to run at these faster paces that we're going to chat about later on. Eohippus would have lived in this sort of environment, sort of like a marshy forest, lots of good places to hide, and would have also had lots of leaves and fruits, various foliage for them to eat as well. So it would have been a really great habitat for them to live in, as well as provide them with lots of hiding places from predators. Since they were quite small, this was something that they needed to be quite cautious of. Next, we move on to Mesohippus, or the middle horse. Mesohippus would have appeared during the late Eocene, early Oligocene, about 37 to 32 million years ago, following Eohippus. And it was very abundant in the Oligocene of North America. We find lots of fossils in Colorado and the Great Plains, so think Nebraska, the Dakotas, as well as Canada. And the appearance of Mesohippus coincided with this shift from a more closed forest habitat, like we chatted about just now with Eohippus, to a more open flatland habitat. And this is also about the time that we see some of the earliest grasses appearing. So some traits that Mesohippus exhibited, which also are thought to have been driven by this expansion of grasslands. It is the first fully tridactyl horse. However, it still had toe pads. So we can see that the fifth digit that we had in Eohippus in the front foot is now gone. He doesn't have it anymore. And we also see a pretty notable reduction in all digits but the third. So this middle digit right here in both the front and the hind limbs. Now this is the digit that bears most of the weight while walking. All toes still do come into contact with the ground when the animal is running. However, this is a shift to that more stable limbs, simply resting on one digit. That is ideal for faster paced movements. The teeth of Mesohippus are still pretty brachiodont, so probably would have still been eating things like leaves and fruits, but we can see that the crown is increasing, so this part right here, a little bit in height, so becoming slightly more adapted to eating tougher vegetation. And although it is still relatively small, this is compared to a human, it is increasing in size. It's almost double the size of Eohippus, and the legs are becoming even longer, as we can see here, which is a really good an adaptation for open habitats. And this is just a little nice artistic drawing of what Mesohippus might have looked like galloping along these more open flatland environments. But we do still see there's a little forest habitat right over there. Next, we have Myohippus, originally named because it was thought to be a horse that occurred during the Miocene, named by Marsh. However, this is not actually correct. Myohippus lived from the late Eocene, late Eocene to the late Oligocene, about 32 to 25 million years ago. And Myohippus is one of the longest living and most successful species of horse. It was very wide-ranging, living everywhere from Alberta to Florida and California. Why my laser pointer was there, sorry. So some traits that Myohippus had, as you can see, it has a similar limb morphology to Mesohippus. It's tridactyl, but we see an even greater reduction of the second and fourth digits. So those are both those side digits of the limb. However, it did still retain those underfoot pads. A more interesting trait is that, again, still having the brachiodont teeth, they have developed this extra, very variable crest on the upper molars, which would later become characteristic of its descendant horses. And this addition of that crest allowed Myohippus to consume tougher foods more easily. So think things like grasses, maybe some shrubs, etc. Again, we see body size is continually increasing. It's larger and heavier than Mesohippus, and Myohippus is thought to have had two forms, one of which lived in a more forested habitat, which we're not really going to talk about today, and the other which was a grassland dweller. And this lineage of Myohippus is thought to be the one that gives rise to that suite of descendant horses. Next, we have Parahippus, which means near to horse. I don't know why my pointer keeps doing that, whatever. Now, this is the horse that finally appeared during the Miocene, about 24 to 17 million years ago. And much like Myohippus that we just talked about, it too would have lived in the Great Plains of North America, as well as Florida. And Parahippus is considered to be one of the earliest true equines. This laser pointer is driving me nuts. Okay. Again, we see this shift towards greater reduction of the second and the fourth digit, really, really pushing for this singular weight-bearing digit. And finally, we lose those toe pads. Now the foot is in the form of a hoof that comes into direct contact with the ground. What we're seeing as well with this loss of the side digits is a shift towards a more upright posture. So by bearing weight only on a singular digit, you can stand with your legs a little bit straighter. This is called unguligrad posture, and it's thought to be an adaptation for open habitats and for running across these plains. We also see the development of an early hypsodont tooth. So again, that increasing crown height, a little bit more complexity of the shape of the enamel pattern. And we have the development of what's called a cementum, which is essentially just this hard protective coating that surrounds the tooth and helps horses to deal with tougher foods like grasses a little bit more easily. And since grass is now a pretty important component of the diet of horses, it's important to have these adaptations to deal with this really tough sort of food. And we're seeing, again, an increase in body size. Now this Parahippus is about the size of a small pony as we would recognize it today. So I would say about medium body size in comparison to all the horses that we've talked about so far. Next, we get to Merychippus, which is probably one of the more recognizable horses in horse evolution. Merychippus, despite being called the ruminant horse, there's actually no evidence that it was a ruminant, so the name is kind of misleading. Merychippus evolved during the Miocene, about 15.97 million years ago, and persisted until 5.3, give or take, million years ago. And it was also a really successful species, having, a long temporal dispersal, but also a very wide spatial dispersal throughout all of North America. And Merychippus is thought to have given rise to many evolutionary lines throughout its existence, including the lineage that would directly lead to modern Equus. Merychippus is also the first equid that has a head that really closely resembles that of the modern horse. So if you saw Merychippus walking, sitting in a field or walking along the side of the road today, without taking too much of a close look, you would probably just assume that it's a regular horse and move on with your day. So some traits Merychippus had. It does, again, have a singular weight-bearing digit, but we do also have the vestigial second and fourth digits as well. Merychippus lived during the Miocene, which is a time of pretty great environmental changes going on, most notably this really significant expansion of grasslands. And so Merychippus had to adapt to these sorts of open environments. So like I've been alluding to, having this one primary weight-bearing digit is really advantageous to this sort of habitat. And the other toes only come into contact with the ground while the animal would have been running at really high speeds. But we see most of the leg bones are starting to fuse, and this gives the animals better resistance to bending and torsion forces that are associated with running. So your leg is less likely to bend or break. It's more durable. You can run for longer distances without having to worry about any sort of injury, which is really good if you're trying to avoid predators. Merychippus is also one of the earliest true grazing horses with a diet that's almost exclusively composed of grasses. So it would have had hypsodont teeth. And we're seeing, again, a lengthening of that crown quite dramatically now, actually. And these teeth would have been fully covered by the cementum that I talked about earlier, which allows for them to process phytoliths, which are these little particles of silica in grasses, as well as external grit that's associated with these more open grassland habitats, because you'll have more wind if it's an open environment, and that kind of carries the eroded bits of grit and sand into your habitat, and you have to have teeth to deal with that. Otherwise, your teeth will simply wear down too quickly and you will starve to death. Again, we see a larger body size. Merychippus quite closely resembles, as I mentioned before, a modern pony and was close in size to one. Merychippus was the largest equine at its time. And it's thought that the fusion of the limb bones, like we had just talked about, was also instrumental in allowing for Merychippus to achieve such a large body size. Merychippus also lived in groups, and here you can see a nice little herd of Merychippus running away from predators. So its improved running abilities would have been really, really key living in these open habitats without any sort of trees or hiding places. It would have really needed to be able to rely on its own ability to run long distances and quickly to evade capture by predators and subsequent death. So we move on to Pliohippus, which means more horse. Initially was named because was thought to have lived during the Pliocene. This has actually been shown to be incorrect. It existed rather during the late Miocene, so from about 12 to 6 million years ago. So it would have overlapped with Merychippus, which is thought to be its ancestor as well. We find Pliohippus all throughout the Great Plains and Canada, and even more so than Merychippus, it is very, very similar in appearance to modern Equus. Recently, Pliohippus has been split into two genera, Pliohippus, like we're looking at right now, and Dinohippus, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. So some traits of Pliohippus. Pliohippus is considered to be the first true monodactyl or singular digit horse. We can see that the second and fourth digits on both the front and hind limbs have been reduced to what we call splint bones. We see these in modern horses. They're just notably smaller, as we'll see in a little bit. And these are vestigial. They don't really serve any sort of purpose. They don't come into contact with the ground. They're not weight bearing. Pliohippus is truly monodactyl with its singular hoof at the bottom bearing all of its weight. And we can see that this also gives the horse a very upright limb posture, as we also see in Equus. Again, further adaptations for those grasslands and those open environments. Pliohippus also has hypsodont teeth, as we've been talking about. These are very well suited for grazing, so it would have been primarily a grazer living in very open grassland habitats. And it has, oh, I think someone is unmuted. Oh, there we go. Sorry. It had a very large body size compared to the others, again, being the size of a large pony. And we can see it here in comparison with a modern human. Moving on to Dinohippus. No, it is not a dinosaur horse. The name actually means terrible horse. And this is that group that I was mentioning that was split off into a separate genera from Pliohippus. Dinohippus arose during the Middle Miocene about 10.3 million years ago, and went extinct during the late Pliocene about 3.6 million years ago. And Dinohippus is believed to be the last direct ancestor to the genus Equus. It was the most common horse during its time, really abundant, found from Alberta and down into Florida throughout the United States, and even found in Panama, which is pretty cool. Some traits that Dinohippus exhibited, as I'm sure you have guessed, it is monodactyl, and we see even further reduction of the second and fourth digits. So very, very small. They're just these two little blips right there. And interestingly, Dinohippus is the first horse to display the stay apparatus. So I don't know if you've ever seen like a modern horse that is asleep while standing up, but essentially this is permitted by the evolution of this stay apparatus. So basically what it is an arrangement of muscles, tendons, and ligaments in the animal's legs that allow it to stand with virtually no muscular effort. So it's super easy for them to do, takes no energy. And this stay apparatus that's exhibited by both Dinohippus and Equus is further support for this link between these two genera. Interestingly, though, there is a variation of Dinohippus found in Nebraska that is tridactyl. We're not going to talk too much about that. Possibly this would be an atavism, so a reversion to like an earlier morphology, but I'm not going to touch that today. We're just going to keep trucking along. We see highly hypsodont teeth exhibited by Dinohippus that are really similar in appearance to that of modern horses. So it's much straighter than some of the past teeth have been, very, very long. So this would have been ideal for processing grasses. And Dinohippus had a rather large body size, and it's about the size of a small horse now. So it could be virtually unrecognizable. Again, if we saw a Dinohippus just sitting in the field with other horses, you would just think that it's a regular horse and move on. And now, oh, did not let the animation go, whatever. And now we move on to my favorite group, Equus. So right up here, we can see all the other horse groups that have died off. We see Dinohippus right here, giving rise to the only extant genus of horse being Equus. Equus would have emerged about 5 to 4.5 million years ago, and the earliest fossils have been found in Idaho of the United States. And Equus would have eventually achieved worldwide distributions. You can see it would have evolved somewhere in North America, possibly Equus simplicitans, Hagerman's horse, which would have dispersed into Eurasia, South America, etc. Important to note, horses in North America did go extinct at the end of the Pleistocene, and all modern horses are descended from animals that existed, or modern domestic horses, I should say, are descended from animals that existed on the Western Eurasian steppes. So what are some traits of Equus? Well, it is a monodactyl animal, to the surprise of absolutely no one, with all of its weight being borne on a singular toe, ending in one large keratinous hoof. The teeth are highly hypsodont. They're longer, they're straighter than any horse before, and they have more complex enamel patterns as seen here. Although ancient Equus tended to be on the larger size, and especially in comparison with its ancestors, it is quite variable, not only in terms of ancient species of Equus that could be on the smaller side, on the larger side, but even today, you know, you think of something like a Shetland pony versus a Clydesdale, those are the same genus and even the same species. So a lot of variation in body size, which is pretty neat. This degree of size variability is pretty unique to Equus, especially in comparison with other extinct horses that seem to be more uniform in the diversity of sizes that they exhibit. That's pretty cool. Currently, we have 7 or debatably 8 living species of Equus, kind of depends on who you ask. So we have the Kiang over here, mountain zebra, donkeys, the Przewalski's horse, which some folks consider to be a subspecies of the domestic horse. Some folks consider it a distinct species. Jury's kind of out on that one. We have the plain zebra, gravy zebra, the domestic horse, and then finally the onager. But what about extinct Equus? Surely there were more species, and if you think that, you would be correct. I'm going to show you just a very small sampling of extinct Equus, otherwise we would literally be here all day. But here are some more recently extinct forms. So we have the tarpan horse and the quagga, which would have gone extinct much more recently than something like Equus occidentalis, the western horse, Equus conversitans, the Mexican horse, Equus simplicitans, which I mentioned before, Hagerman's horse, considered to be one of the earliest members of the genus Equus, or Equus giganteus, which was a very, very large horse. Again, just a small subsampling, because there's more, there's a lot. As we can see, the Equus family tree is perhaps not quite so straightforward as that evolutionary lineage that I showed you at the beginning. There's a lot of debate and many conflicting opinions regarding how many species of Equus there really are. And I'll point out this is only horses from the Irvingtonian and Rancho La Brea North American land mammal ages, and only stout-legged or true caballine horses. So there's even more horses than what we're seeing here. There's a lot of debate regarding how many species there were, how many are valid, which species should be synonymized with what. And as we can see, based on this legend, the color codes, some species were named on pretty fragmentary remains. So Equus major, for example, 1 or 2 teeth, Equus giganteus, which I mentioned before, just a couple teeth. Some are named on better, fossil remains, and some have fairly good support. But there's not really a resolution to this. It's kind of just a depiction of what previous research has found and suggested. But all that to say is it is very, very challenging for us to determine the validity and the true number of Equus species that existed. So we have many, many unanswered questions. Why were there so many horses? Did species coexist? When did they all go extinct? Why did they go extinct in North America, but not Eurasia? Tons that we still don't know about Equus, which might be surprising considering how often they're used as this model organism for evolution in textbooks. So that's where I come in. This is me at my field site in Yukon that we were very lucky to go to last year. Bunch of fossils in the background. And I will point out it's not just me that's trying to figure this out. There's a whole group of wonderful folks who are very invested in Equus evolution and kind of solving some of these problems that I am very fortunate to work with. I just thought this picture was funny and I wanted to put it in there. So my PhD research is focused on a small subsampling of some of these questions in a very specific area. So I'm focused on reconstructing and improving our understanding of the phylogeny, ecology, and extinction chronology, specifically of Beringian horses. And here is a picture of me working, taking some molds of teeth in the collections of the Canadian Museum of Nature. So you might be wondering, well, what is Beringia? Beringia was a multi-continental landmass that was around during the Pleistocene, so the most recent ice age, that connected westernmost Siberia into easternmost Alaska and Yukon. As we know, during the Pleistocene, sea levels were much lower than they were today, exposing the floor of the Bering Strait because a lot of the Earth's water was locked up in glaciers and these massive, massive ice sheets like we can see right here. So I specifically work in Yukon and a little bit of Alaska, but this is generally where I have access to fossil specimens. So this is where I am focusing the majority of my research. So at present, there are 6 species of horses that have been named from Beringia. So we have horses such as Equus alaskae, Equus lambae, which is the Yukon horse, Equus neobarensis alaskae, Equus verae, and Equus scotti. All these have been identified based on varying degrees of, fossil abundance, quality of preservation. The existence of some is better supported than others. Some is a little bit contentious. So I'm trying to really figure out, how many species there really were and which species actually existed. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but wait, Zoe, you said there were 6 species of Beringian equus, and you would be right, because we also have Harringtonhippus francesi. So there is, in fact, a 6th species. There is a little bit of debate, however, regarding whether or not Harringtonhippus should be synonymized and grouped in with equus, but that's a discussion for another day. And to further complicate things, Harringtonhippus is considered to be a member of the stilt-legged horse group, meaning that these limb bones, the metapodials of Harringtonhippus, are longer and more slender than that of any of the 5 horse species that I mentioned on the previous slide, the caballine or true horses. So this makes things just even more challenging, but even more fun when we're trying to figure out what exactly was going on with this community of equus in Beringia. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, are limb bones useful? And this was a question that I thought of with my supervisor, Danielle Frazier. Can we use this? Can we use these limb bones? Because there are so many of them in collections to identify species. Historically, metapodials, so these limb bones right here that I was talking about, have been used by other authors as a means of identifying horse species. It's thought that the postcranial skeleton of horses would be quite strongly constrained, evolutionary speaking, by both anatomical and phylogenetic, so familial constraints. So this might mean that any sort of shape changes that occur in these bones would be highly conserved among taxa. So I wanted to investigate this. And to do this, I decided to analyze metapodials to test whether or not there are significant differences in the shape of metapodials that would support the existence of multiple species in Beringia. So to do this, I took 10 measurements at varying points of a bunch of different metapodials. I think there was 206 total. So it took a long time. I didn't do it all alone. I had help, thankfully. But essentially what we do is we take measurements from these bones, plug them into equations, and then we can figure out, how big the horses are. We correct for any sort of like scaling issues, and then we can directly compare all of these measurements to one another in order to determine if we can see any sort of separation among species. So what's the verdict? As you can see here, are all of our little data points, color-coded by species. And it kind of just looks like a gunshot, right? There's not really any sort of super distinct grouping. Maybe we can say that there's a difference between Equus lambe in the blue squares versus Equus vere in the green triangles, but there's a lot of overlap, particularly with these unidentified Equus spurs. So basically, this just means that we don't actually know what species of these particular specimens is. So are limb bones useful? Can we use them to identify horses to the species level? Not really. They're not the most useful parameters. And you might be wondering, well, why? And it's thought that this would relate back to body mass. So as we can see, that we have a continuous variation increasing in body mass among Beringian horses. We see this big overlap with the unidentified species group, spanning from our smallest horse, Eohippus, all the way to our largest horse of Equus vere. So it's thought that any changes in metapodials are related more to body mass, more for allowing horses to get bigger, rather than being informative for the species identities of these horses. So why does this matter? Why am I studying Beringian horses? What's the point? Beringian horses offer a really unique opportunity to study the responses of ancient species to both climatic and human perturbations. Beringian horses lived through periods of notable climate change during the Ice Age, ultimately going extinct at the very end, when there was a period of significant global warming. They also coexisted with humans for thousands of years. So they would have had these interactions with people, much like some species are today. So it's a really, really good opportunity in a very isolated period of time that we can kind of look at how these horses were dealing with this, were coping with that, and perhaps why they were unsuccessful. It'll also help us to uncover the true drivers of North American horse extinction. We don't really know why exactly horses in North America went extinct and horses in Eurasia survived. It's kind of something that lots of folks are trying to work on. There's a bunch of conflicting opinions, as with anything, but it would be really nice to uncover the drivers of this extinction, because it could offer us insights into certain traits that may affect a species' ability to cope with environmental or human-driven change. And this would have really important implications for modern biodiversity conservation. Say it might be related to diet. Okay, we need to preserve very key aspects of the diets of animals that are at risk. Otherwise, they won't have food to eat and they will go extinct. So things like that, that you might not necessarily think of paleontology being useful for, actually is. So by using traits from animals that existed in the past, we can better inform present and future conservation decisions based on similar traits. And horses are really an ideal model organism for grazing herbivore. They're quite generalists, so we can apply this to a variety of animals, or apply what we learned from Beringian horses to a variety of animals. Of course, I am not done my PhD research yet. I still have a lot to do. So if you're interested in horses, stay tuned for more. Hopefully I'll be back giving another talk when I've completed more of my research. And this is just some fun little, I guess, Easter egg hints about what I'll be doing in the next few years. So with that, we have come quite a long way, starting off with the little Eohippus, all the way up to the beautiful Equus as we see them today. Thank you for coming with me on this journey of horse evolution. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As always, there's lots of folks to thank. This research would not be possible without all of the lovely people listed here, all of these institutions. It takes a village to raise a PhD, I suppose. So I just want to say a big thank you to everyone that is involved with my research and is helping. And I want to say thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for listening.